Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? All right. Everyone always complains that I'm soft-spoken at times. Thank you so much for joining us today's session. I'm so grateful that we have these fantastic leaders that are joining us to be talking about balancing employee sentiment and the metrics for successful business impact. And you all are true pros. Fran just walked in the door and is able to come right up on the panel stage and present here today. So it's going to be a great, lively, interesting conversation. My name is Lynn Dome. I'm Women in Cybersecurity Executive Director. We often go by our acronym WICYS, spelling it W-I-C-Y-S. And we're a 501c3 nonprofit with over 9,500 members. We have representation in 99 countries, and our mission is to recruit, retain, and advance women in cybersecurity. So I'll be moderating today's panel, and the purpose of today's panel discussion is to elevate that diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging conversation. And we're going to be looking at the business impact of what some of these successful programming efforts have brought forward. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic on down, well, you all are mic'd, to introduce yourself. So, Kristen?
Yeah, hi, I'm Kristen Dean. I'm the Chief People Officer at Arctic Wolf.
Great, Fran?
Hi there, I'm Fran Katsoudas, and I'm the Chief People Policy and Purpose Officer at Cisco.
Good morning, everyone. MK Palmore. I'm a Senior Cybersecurity Advisor with Google Cloud and also the president of an organization called Cyversity, which occupies a very similar space to WICYS. Pleasure to see you all here on this bright morning in San Francisco.
Thank you. Thank you. So we all know that culture shifts and changes throughout an organization. We also know that that inclusive culture stems from the leadership down. But how is that impacting everyone that's involved, the direct managers, the peers, and importantly, the programming efforts of the organization and the business impact itself? And so today's conversation is really interesting to me because WICYS has just done a State of Inclusion Benchmark report, and we found some very interesting data in that. But one thing that came up and bubbled up to the top was very apparent right away is that women in cybersecurity are 5 times more likely to experience exclusionary activity from direct managers and peers as opposed to men. And so what this panel discussion is about what's working, how is it going throughout all the employees, the colleagues, the peers, the direct managers and leadership, and how is this business impact really resulting in good, solid metrics for each one of these organizations? So I'm going to dive in with Fran with the first question. So Fran, a couple of years ago, Cisco came out with a purpose, and it's called Power an Inclusive Future for All. I love that. And Fran, you really led that effort and what impact it had on all the employees. But how do you think that change was also shifting what Cisco was doing externally? And if you could share a little bit more about how did that come forward? How did you bring that purpose forward within the organization? And how did you lead that effort?
Thank you so much. So if we go back just a little bit in time, I think we would see that both diversity and what we would call social impact bodies of work would sometimes sit on the side from an organization perspective. It was important work, but it had its own lane. And so I think the biggest shift was that when we said that our purpose as a company was to power an inclusive future for all, what we were doing in that moment was we were intersecting that purpose with our technology as a company. And what was so interesting, and I think within organizations, there are times that bodies of work land really well, and there's times where you need a ton of adoption to get something over the line. And what was so fascinating at Cisco, and the timing probably played a role in this was early from a COVID perspective, our employees just took that purpose. And I think all of us started to feel an accountability for how does our work intersect an inclusive future for all. And from a technology perspective, what we started to look at first was we know how important it is for people to be connected. And I think we all understand the impact of the digital divide, and that if you're not connected, you can't participate, whether it's work, education, healthcare. But then we realized as well, if you can't securely connect, you're not going to be able to participate. And during COVID, I think we saw so many educational institutions that were attacked as well. And so for us, we started to look at our role was to securely connect the world. And so this is something that every single employee owns within the company. We do view education as a big part of how we play this role, and so we educate on our technology. As an example, we've trained about 20 million students over the last 25 years. In the last 3 or 4 years, I would say the focus is absolutely on security.
That's fantastic. So Kristen, I know Arctic Wolf has really led efforts with that purpose as well. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, our purpose was really like very organic with diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and it started internally, and it started with just one person. A few years ago, there was a lot of social unrest, as we know, and we really needed to start doing this in a more dramatic and impactful way. Arctic Wolf at the time was maybe only 1,000 people, probably less than that, and we didn't have any programs, and we needed something. So we created something called Pack Unity, which we didn't hire anyone. We don't have anyone staffed in the diversity space on the team, but we really gave the power to all of the employees to be able to create this Pack Unity. We formed alliances, we carved out budget, and we really took the purpose to create a sense of inclusion, hiring more diverse employees, and then hoping and creating programs so that everyone could feel like they belong.
And coming up with a creative name too, Pack
Pack
Unity,
Unity. I
Arctic
thought so as
Wolf.
well.
I like it.
Right?
Very good. Job well done. And what about Google, MK?
Yeah, what about Google? So 180,000 employee workforce around the world, right? Large-scale technology provider. One of the things that I recall more than 3 years ago when I first interviewed for the position I have at Google is asking about where they stood on DEI. I wanted to know what the DEI program looked like. I wanted to know whether or not it was going to be a component of the culture when I joined the organization. I was assured that it was, and I feel very comfortable in saying that it's absolutely lived up to that. And let me tell you what I mean by that, or explore that a little further. I think that the subject of inclusion, the subject of diversity in the workspace, making folks feel a sense of belonging, where, quite honestly, we spend the majority of our time at work, is one of the most important topics that business has had to tackle probably in the past decade. I think more so it's become poignant, I think, in the past 2 years or so, or maybe 3 years. But understanding that leaders within the organization have an immense responsibility for creating a more inclusive environment. And I would say that not only is it a function and a matter of the culture at Google, but it's something that we understand that leaders have to participate in, or else, without that leadership participation, without folks at the executive level actually engaged in this topic, ensuring that it is a part of not just the hiring mechanism. This is more than just hiring bodies into an organization. This is really about giving folks an opportunity to operate in an environment where they feel nurtured, where they feel there's an opportunity for them to excel, and giving them pathways, quite honestly, to mature. I participate as a sponsor internally at Google, and so I sponsor a number of employees in terms of mentoring. I would ask every person in here who is a senior cybersecurity practitioner that if you haven't spent time mentoring someone, you are missing out on a huge part of what your responsibilities are on the job. And so there's a formal mentoring program across Google and across Google Cloud that I'm a participant in. And there are a number of ways, again, leader-led, leader-enforced, that allow us the opportunity to ensure that that's part of the day-to-day, week-to-week culture at Google. And I would ask and challenge anyone in here to ask your own organizations about where they stand on these matters, and if they are not part of the organization culture, if they are not part of the day-to-day of the organization, that gives you a huge indication as to where that organization stands on this topic.
Yeah, and all three of your organizations really stand loud and clear. I know you are all, wonderful supporters and partners of the WESIS organization and really walking the walk. But that mentor-mentee component is really important. And through a lot of research, we've learned that an individual is 5 times more likely to get promoted if they have a mentor, but a mentor is 6 times more likely to get promoted. So if you haven't stepped into the space of mentoring, I would strongly encourage you all to reach out to your employer or join organizations like Cyversity, WESIS, other nonprofits that all have these type of programming efforts.
I would double click on that if you wouldn't mind. Just
Yeah.
that what you just said is huge. If you mentor, you are 6 times more likely to get promoted. And I'm sure that promotion is on the minds of everyone in this room. That's huge. I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, yeah.
I also think you don't need a formal program. Maybe your companies don't have that yet. Take it upon yourself to just reach out to someone that you know you could help and be their mentor, or ask someone else if they could be a mentor for you. It doesn't have to be so structured. You could start it organically too.
You certainly can. We're at a perfect opportunity. This entire week is all about networking and meeting people. And so this is a great place to start. So, piggybacking on that, what are some of the elements of leadership and management that influence the internal culture of an organization? We know that it's so important for leadership to have the buy-in and leadership to take the lead, and that inclusive culture stems from the leadership down. It trickles down to everything,
Right.
down to the program, the business impact, the profitability of a corporation. But what are some of those elements of leadership and management? And Kristen, I'd like to start with you.
Yeah, sure. Thankfully, we have a wonderful CEO, Nick Schneider, who has really led by example and then also pushed power to the edge. We really try to show what we want the employees to embark on, but then also give them the power, autonomy, and authority to be able to create programs. We've created 10 employee resource groups, which we call PAC Alliances, and we push budget down, we push leadership down, we push the programming down, and the employees can really do what they want with those budget dollars. Of course, we help with them in HR with some guide rails, but the leadership fully supports the different organizations within the company to be able to do what they think is best for the groups that they're supporting.
That's fantastic. How about Fran at Cisco?
Yeah, you know, it's so interesting as I listen to this conversation because some of the most impactful bodies of work, I think to the points mentioned, can be a very light lift as far as what it takes to put them in place, but the signals that come from that are really meaningful. I do like the theme around belonging. I think it's so incredibly important. At Cisco, we talk about a concept of full spectrum of diversity. And what we're trying to signal to our teams is that everyone belongs. And so we look at diversity from a gender, race, ethnicity, experience, veteran status, religion, you name it. And the amazing thing is, the broader you define it, the more your people are able to recognize themselves and feel like we all play a role. I think from a programmatic perspective, there's probably 2 things that I would share. The first is that all of our leaders at Cisco sponsor someone who is diverse. And mentorship and sponsorship, I think, are so powerful. Sponsorship basically means that you're committed to helping someone's career grow and that you're someone who will be in the room when decisions happen about promotions, special projects, rotations, and that you advocate. And so that's one program that I think is incredibly important, and we ask that every single vice president in the company sponsor someone, and we do that all the way down to the manager level where they're sponsoring as well. And then the other thing that I would say is we have these proximity discussions, and again, these are things that you can stand up easily. And in fact, from a Cisco perspective, happy to share the construct here, but proximity basically means you have a meeting with someone once a quarter that had a very different upbringing and life experience than you. And we think that that makes you better. I think that's why you have a higher likelihood of getting promoted when you're a mentor, because those proximity discussions, they give you context, they give you experience, they help you learn what it means to be a servant leader. So those are a few of the things we're doing today.
I love it. And I always say that if anyone's over the age of 45, they need to be mentored by someone under the age of 30, because where our lifestyles are completely different right now. And that's a really, really, like that reverse mentoring piece is also very important as, you know, I get higher in the age bracket myself. So, and MK, what about Google?
Yeah, so I think this shift in the conversation as we start to veer towards leadership, I would call it responsibilities, I think is where we can spend a good amount of time, I think, discussing this subject. I think oftentimes in this topic of DE&I, belonging and inclusion, I think we have been remiss in aligning it with leadership responsibilities. We've been talking about it as if it was an abstract concept that suddenly an organization was responsible for somehow developing. It is somewhat abstract, but the people responsible for ensuring that it becomes embedded in the culture are the leaders of the organization, everywhere from the hiring manager all the way up through the board of directors, right? And unless and until you have buy-in from that group, you won't find a program that's sustainable or able to exist anywhere in the enterprise. So I think that a part of leadership responsibilities, along with, hey, accomplish the mission, build that widget, ship that product, secure the perimeter, do all of the things that you're supposed to do. Well, guess what? If you want to evolve as a leader, you also need to be thinking about how to get the best level of productivity out of the teams that you're responsible for. And if you aren't thinking about and aligning on areas of inclusion and trying to figure out how to make your team feel as though all of them are included in the driving efforts of the team, then you will be underproducing and subsequently missing the mark.
I think that's a really great point, because we discovered that probably 3 years ago, that we did not have it tied to leadership responsibility, to have how are they recruiting, how are they creating a sense of belonging, how are they creating culture within our culture. And so we actually changed our performance reviews to include one of our culture tenets, which is Stronger Together. And so now everyone in the company gets a review based on how do they create spaces for people to feel like they have a sense of belonging and are included. But it was a miss for a while there.
It's lovely. That's really great that you included that. So piggybacking on productivity, the hybrid culture, we had a taste of it. COVID definitely forced us into that area. And now we're going back into this, can you work from home? Are you forced to come in the office? There's data that's coming out now on top of it that more people are wanting that hybrid culture, more people are wanting work from home, but then there's other data that's coming out that people are getting paid more if they're actually going into the office. So there's all these conflicting opinions that are going on right now, and I know a lot of companies are really struggling navigating through it. What's the most productivity effort and the inclusivity that we could offer our employees for that sentiment? But also what's best for the organization, and how, as big companies yourselves, how are you navigating through this? And so, Fran, would you like to kick off this conversation?
Sure. It's so funny because I would have guessed a couple years ago that we would be done with this topic. And we're so not done.
But I wish we were.
In some ways, I do too. And here's part of the challenge. I think we are so binary on this topic. It's like pick a side. Are you for remote work or in-office work? And I think that's a bit of a mistake. So the approach that we have at Cisco is that we try to make these decisions based on the work and based on your team. And so we have some groups that, based on the work that they do, are in the office a bit more often, so 3 or 4 days. And then we have some teams that candidly, they will come in for a special meeting or event, and that works for us as well. It's interesting because I think the dialogue goes back to the leader, and so what we've basically said is that we trust the leader to make the right call for the team and to take all of those different aspects into consideration. Now, the interesting thing is that when we were working fully remote, we could start to see employees getting really nervous about what happens when my peers go back and I don't. And so what we started to look at was, what was the pay differential for remote employees versus in-office employees before COVID? And at that time, 35% of our employees had hybrid work arrangements already. I think our technology just kind of led us there. So what we could see is that for the 35% of people that worked from home before COVID, their promotion velocity and their engagement matched that of their peers that were in the office. And so it was a way for us to prove that if your leaders are properly trained and if they're focused on outcomes and not watching people do the work, you could actually have great careers remotely as well. And so that's how we manage it, but I will say that it's still a hot topic, and I can see some leaders feel more confident and comfortable when they can see their team members. And I guess we would just say, let the work and the people guide you.
Yeah, and this was the topic even before COVID. I mean, I remember reading many, many years ago, maybe 10 years ago about a company that did an experiment with their employees saying, for the summer, we're gonna want everyone to come in around 7:30, 8 o'clock, but we want everyone to leave at 1 o'clock and enjoy their life. We want you to live to the purpose of the culture that we're creating, and they were outdoor like kind of activities company. And so they wanted everyone to go out for the summer. They wanted them to kayak, walk, do whatever they wanted to do, enjoy their families. And they gauged all those metrics of success, and at the end of the summer, they decided that their productivity went higher because everyone was living the life that they wanted to live, in addition to working for a company that they wanted to work for. And so they decided to keep that culture ongoing. And I mean, this was so many years ago, I couldn't even, source the data. I'd have to research it, re-research it right now.
Okay, I love that experiment.
And so
Good
they
looking at
kept it, and it was great. And they didn't let their employees know in advance that they were looking at this as maybe a long-term solution to increase employee sentiment of the org. So it went over really well. But MK, do you have anything to share on this?
Yeah, so maybe a little bit of a different perspective. So prior to coming into the technology sector, I spent a career in the U.S. government. And so I can tell you from 32 years in the U.S. government, there was no such thing as remote work.
Right.
If you were not in your seat from time to time, people assumed you were not working. That's kind of how the paradigm was. So to experience now in the technology sector, this experience of hybrid work, which is the place where most corporations have landed. There's this sort of freedom for leaders and individuals to determine where is the best place for them to be the most productive. It's interesting to me that the levels of productivity, I talk for me personally, I'm infinitely more productive on my own at home than I am in the office. I think most people resonate with that only because you can sort of get a lot of things done without interruption, and you quickly have all the things available to you that you need. But as a workforce, our alignment is very similar to what was described by Fran at Cisco, which is hybrid. Leaders are making decisions, but I will tell you the big challenge is, and I don't know for those of you in the room that work on global teams the way that I do, even with the hybrid positioning and with the freedom to go in the office when you need to, I find myself largely only going in for customer-facing events, because my team's global and there are very few members that are actually resident here in this geographical area of San Francisco. So that offers a little bit of a challenge, but I will land on where Fran started, which is good leaders, all of whom, by the way, want to be successful. Remember, I prefaced that with good leaders want to be successful. They will figure out what works best for their teams and how they draw the most productivity out of a team of people.
That's great. And transitioning from military into that kind of free-spirited structure of Google had to have been quite an adjustment as well.
I had a stopping point before Google, so I was fairly well adjusted by the time I got there. But yes,
you had a little transition.
Very different. I had a bridge.
Yeah. Sure. And how about Arctic Wolf, Kristen?
We're a little bit of a smaller organization, so we're only 2,500 employees, and we've created these hubs, our offices, this great nucleus of culture. And so we really do encourage people who are by the office to go into the office 3 days a week. We have a remote program, of course, because we have employees all over the world. But for the employees that live close, it helps us continue to build on our culture, being earlier in the stage of growth that we're at. And so it's important for us to be in the office. For me as a leader, we're hiring so many new people all the time. I mean, we double our company size almost every year. It's just important for our leaders to be in the office and be there so that people can ask me questions. And I'm more productive at home, like MK is, but part of my job right now, today at the stage we're at, is for me to be available to the people that are coming in, that are new, my team. And so for us today, the hybrid 3 days a week works really well.
Yeah. Fran, are you more productive at home? Fran, are you ever home? I don't think you're ever home. I know your assistant's out here in the audience, and she's like, she's never home.
Yeah, I've been traveling quite a bit. You know what? Honestly, I like the mix. I think I'm better that way. So what's so interesting is that the work that I do when I'm in the office is so different. And when I'm in the office, I make time to bump into people. I make time to walk to the cafe. And there are different experiences that come from that I love. And there's times where I need to really be head down. And that's where I find less interruptions is quite helpful. So I do think there's something about how we architect our day and being thoughtful around which place you're going to be in the work as well.
Love it. Yeah. So employee sentiment, how do we measure this? We're talking about employee sentiment. We're here as inclusive leaders ourselves leading these initiatives and efforts, but it's always interesting to me, like, how do you get those metrics on making the decisions for the organization? And I don't know who wants to kick this off. Kristen, MK?
Sure. For us, tactically, we measure it twice a year. We have engagement surveys that we send out that measure engagement and ENPS, and we have a 70% participation rate. So I feel like we have a good sense of the sentiment and the culture. And they're pretty high. Our engagement is 8.1 and our ENPS is in the high 40s. We have a lot to work on and continue to, but those are two very tactical ways that we measure. And probably the positive thing that comes out of it is we find that our underrepresented groups actually score higher in our DEIB category questions than our other groups do. So we draw from that, we work on that, and we continue to build on the work that we're doing there to ensure that that's how it stays.
Very good. And what I love about asking this question is that because you are a smaller organization that's doubling your size every single year, that's really significant in how you're gauging and gathering these metrics as you're doubling that growth. And then we have, larger organizations. So Fran, would you mind sharing about how you're getting those metrics?
Sure. We're constantly assessing sentiment and engagement. We run we call it the Real Deal. We run a formal program on a quarterly basis where we go out to a subset of our population. For us, we like kind of the frequent touch points to understand where things are. Technology is our friend. We'll do a lot of sentiment analysis before we go into a company meeting, which we do on a monthly basis. We'll run the chat and the Q&A through sentiment analysis as well, so we can just get the texture of how our people are feeling. I joke sometimes, like I'll go into a company meeting and I'll see that the leading emotion, not often, is annoyed. I'm like, okay, we've got to address this. But having your finger on the pulse of that, I think, is so very important. From an engagement perspective, generally speaking, our engagement is probably, when we look at fully engaged employees, which means those employees that are off the chart positive, we're about 50 to 55%. The broader marketplace is 19% fully engaged. I don't ever like saying 50 to 55% is good, but directionally, it gives us something to shoot for to get even higher. But understanding that is important. And I think Kristen said something really important. I think understanding where the different demographics of the workplace are, understanding when perhaps a group doesn't feel as connected, I think that is so important and impressive from a startup perspective, because that's when you know you have a real issue, when a demographic of the workforce is saying, that's not my experience. And so it's something to stay really close to.
Yeah, that's great. How about Google?
Yeah, so interestingly, Google takes a little bit of a different approach to this. Historically, we did do annual and biannual surveys of the employee base. And I think that at some point made a determination. One, we're all in the technology space, right? It moves really fast. Sentiment can change really quickly depending on what's happening in the environment. And so we've moved to, you may have heard this term, I don't know if you read Business Insider. So we have this thing called Google Geist that essentially surveys employees once a week. And it takes it from the large survey that you're used to seeing down to like 2 or 3 questions. 2 or 3 questions once a week, essentially, to gauge heat maps or develop heat maps around like emerging issues that you can't wait for an entire quarter or an entire year to go by before you gauge where employees are on those particular issues. And we take the feedback from those sessions. We actually, as leaders, gather and action on and have discussions about the areas where we're seeing downward trends, where we're seeing something where in narrative comments that employees are making that deserve the kind of interest that leaders are responsible for turning around and engaging on. And I think, certainly as a recipient of the surveys, right, I find it much easier to answer those 2 questions every week than rather, those end of year surveys, which might be impacted by recency bias. It might be impacted by some event that has recently happened within the organization that, like, I don't know, leaves you with some kind of feeling or taste in your mouth about whatever, and then you end up adding that or providing that sentiment in survey format, and oftentimes I think is an uneven indicator of what a year's experience might be like. So I like the weekly survey touch point, and I'd be interested to see whether or not other organizations move to something like that.
Do you feel like it's a higher engagement? I know I would participate in a survey
Yeah, I mean,
if
2
there's
questions,
only 2
yeah,
questions.
it's not a ton of your time, right? Especially if you're really, it's multiple choice, and if you feel like you want to add a narrative of some kind, then you can around those questions. But I find it easy to respond to. I'm sure the numbers in terms of engagement are up.
Yeah,
I love that.
I would imagine
Are you
so.
doing that with a subset of the population, or are you doing the same questions for
Honestly, I
everyone?
don't know the answer to that.
That's okay. We'll chat later.
Yeah. I'll put you in touch with the folks at Google.
So before we get into some questions from the audience, and I hope all of you have some questions, there's some mics there, and we'll get to those in just a second. I'd like the panelists just to share, what are some blind spots or misconceptions? I mean, we're all learning and growing in this element. No 2 weeks are the same. We have to definitely, I mean, Google is a prime example of just how nimble you have to be by assessing the employee sentiment weekly. So what are some common misconceptions or blind spots have you stumbled upon and that you had to overcome, or that you see in general? Anyone want to dive in first? Go for it.
Yeah, I'll kick this off. One of the things I've noticed is that when we're not talking about this subject of inclusion and diversity, when it's not a component of management responsibilities, leadership responsibilities, it gets overlooked. And when it gets overlooked, the numbers, which will be a lagging indicator, will subsequently show you that there's been a downward trend in this issue within global enterprise. And so the blind spot for most organizations is that this has to be a component of corporate culture. You need to be talking about this, engaging on this weekly in order for it to stick. Because without that kind of emphasis, it quickly goes away and gets deprioritized.
I hope you attend my session on Wednesday on cybersecurity leadership. You could add that in there, MK. Throw it in there at the very end. Fran?
I think that it's a blind spot and perhaps a concern that employees have. Sometimes I think there's a perspective that when you talk about a group within the company, that other groups are less than or not getting focus. And I think sometimes it becomes an equity/equality conversation. And I think as companies, we have to lean into that, and we have to explain why the equity piece is so important. This is also a little bit of why we moved to full spectrum of diversity, because it allowed us to frame and then go a little deeper to say, and the reason we're talking about Black or African American employees is because we have an opportunity here. We've looked at the data. And so I would just say that there's, at this very moment, I think just a concern that when you talk about a group, you're sending a signal to the others, and I just think we have to move beyond that. I also think that a blind spot is not understanding what it's like when you're only like 5 or 9% of an organization. As an example, we did research in Africa, and we know that across the continent, from a security perspective, only 9% of workers are women. And that dynamic, I think, is a blind spot in what that feels like when it's only 9%.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I would just add, I think if you're early in your journey, a blind spot can be you don't know where to start, and it can be overwhelming, and then that can paralyze you and you do nothing. And I think you have to start somewhere. If your heart is in the right place, if you care about everyone, and when you know better, you do better. I think if you start there and just baby step along the way, it's going to get better. And then people will hopefully ride that momentum with you. They'll come along with you. They'll understand that you have empathy and compassion, and you want to learn and you want to do more. And so I think sometimes just a blind spot is not knowing where to start.
And I believe a common thread here is keeping that conversation going strong, just not letting go of it. As a leader, stepping into that space and being okay with sometimes it might get uncomfortable, but knowing that's the moment that the community and everyone needs you to be there even stronger. So, all right, before we get into some key takeaways, any questions from the audience? Yes. And just feel free to walk on up to the mics, all of you. All of you. Don't all come rushing at once.
It's working? Yeah. So, hello. First of all, excuse my English is not my native language, so I would like to address one question a little bit to give you, and before that I would like to give you a little bit of background of myself. So, I'm Vitaly Levins. I'm the Deputy Program Director for USAID-funded project in Western Balkans and Europe, Eastern Europe. We are aiming to increase the cybersecurity resilience of the critical infrastructure in 7 countries in the region, workforce development for cyber, and so on. One of our activity is creating a cyber pathway for women. And as you already told, a lot of parts of this pathway, we've made studies on why women are not participating in cybersecurity. Second, if they want, how should they address this pathway, and so on. And my question about the mentorship. It's very important for anyone, once they decide to come to cybersecurity, to find out what to do, where to start, what certificates to receive, what is needed on the market, and so on. So my question to you, for you big companies, were considering maybe mentorship people outside of the United States, maybe in Europe?
Very good.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for
Yeah.
everyone here on the stage, but Google has made a commitment external to the United States. We have programs in Eastern Europe specifically, supporting organizations geared towards bringing women specifically into the cybersecurity realm. And so this is an area I think that that you will find most global organizations at least understand that there's a bit of a challenge. The answer to it, quite frankly, is exposing folks to the opportunity much earlier than we have traditionally, and you can use the example here in the United States as a prime methodology for when you should be exposing, and we find that if you're at least giving folks an understanding that there is an industry that's technology-based, cybersecurity, if you give them that exposure at the high school level, that's the first time that it will attach and potentially have long-term impact. You reemphasize that given opportunities at the college level, I'll say college age, because another conversation worth having is whether or not going to a normal 4-year institution is a requirement to get into the cybersecurity industry. The short answer on that is that it's not, and that there are pathways for folks to break into this industry through training, certs, certificates, and otherwise that will enable them to break into the industry. But yeah, this is an area of focus, I think, for most organizations that are paying attention to this subject, do understand that there is a lack of diversity in many areas and regions around the world, and you need only do a level 200 review of any study and figure out that in other places around the world, not only are the numbers here in the United States not really great, it's even worse the more you go out in concentric circles around the world.
Yeah, I would just add that the numbers are pretty amazing. So today there are about 4 million jobs that are unfilled due to lack of skills. What we know is about half of those jobs are for entry-level security technicians, which means you don't have to have the degree. From a Cisco perspective, we do a ton of training around the world, and again have pivoted to security, cybersecurity. There are opportunities for online learning if you look up Skills for All, and then there's also classroom sessions through our Cisco Networking Academy. Like Google, we offer certifications at the various levels as well. Certifications, I think, are so important for people who are trying to get jobs. We do a ton also in Eastern Europe. We've recently set up even a bigger presence in Poland because we've been training a lot of the Ukrainian women who have crossed into Poland as well, and happy to partner and set up these networking academies where we can. Thank you.
Yeah, the only thing I would add, I think all of that is great, and then the other opportunity is looking at partnerships, even so outside of Arctic Wolf. So we partner with organizations like Cyversity and WeSys, and we may not have an opportunity within our company, but encouraging people to get involved in those organizations, and then we can partner with them and hopefully hire from those groups as well because they have opportunities there. I think that could be another avenue too, to kind of indirectly get mentorship and then get into a company of your choice.
Yeah, and I appreciate the question because we've done a really good job of making cybersecurity, the pathway, seem very hard, very confusing, very convoluted. And so it's really important as how are we approaching creating those opportunities for others, but creating the accessibility, tapping into underrepresented and underserved communities and clearly laying out how can they get from this point into a cybersecurity career. And so I appreciate all the examples that you all were able to offer. And then there's other nonprofits and organizations that you're able to collaborate with too in that regard. So
Yeah. Thank you so much.
yeah, thank you. Any other questions? Well then, I have a question. So what are the emerging trends? Like, where are you at right now? We're all, this is a moving space all the time. It's something different. And so what are you working on right now that is the emerging trend that you're addressing? And maybe it could give insight for these other folks and these other leaders like, I got to put this on my radar.
Okay, I'll start. I think for all of us, just understanding the intersection of AI with career and development and skills is a huge focus area. What we're seeing is that leveraging AI as a career coach, not only internally for our employees, but for the broader communities, I think will be incredibly helpful. And this assessment of skills, I do think will continue to drive a level of inclusion and fairness in everything that we're doing. In the past, we have leveraged things like blind hiring to really understand the skills and capabilities of people regardless of education or where they went to school. But the AI element is something we're going to lean into big.
Great. Anything
Yeah,
from Google?
so two things. I would double click on obviously the AI piece. I will tell you that the larger part of my responsibility at Google is customer facing, so I spend the majority of my time speaking with customers, and I'll tell you that over the last 18 months, 2-year period, 100% of the conversations are about the application of AI. And then the second part of it is the security of AI. So that's the emerging trend is how can organizations best leverage this new and emerging technology so that they can get efficiencies out of it so that they can drive innovation within their own organizations. So that's one angle. The other angle on this cybersecurity workforce issue that is a prevalent, I will call it necessity, is that what we're doing is we're finding it challenging, and I'd be interested in your thoughts on this, Lynn. We can get folks trained up. We can get them exposed to all of the certs in the world. We can put folks in front of the opportunities to learn. What the challenge is getting them the practical experience to then couple with those certificates and those certifications so that they can translate that into a positive interview and actually get hired someplace. And I will tell you that it's really a struggle trying to find opportunities, internships, apprenticeships, actual hands-on experience for people to solidify their capabilities so that they can get over the hump of getting hired. Security is, the number one issue or risk for most enterprises. Everyone wants to get the hires right? Mm-hmm. Everyone wants to get it right when you hire a security professional, and unfortunately in our industry we feel like we don't have time to train up someone new or give them opportunities to grow and expand, and we want them to hit the ground running. And I think unless and until as an industry we tackle this practical experience phenomenon, I think we're still going to have trouble closing that enormous gap of personnel that we're missing.
It is a definitely big barrier that we're challenged with. So MK, we should have a conversation offline.
We will.
Yes.
Absolutely.
But most importantly, it's going to the employers and really identifying with the employers that this is a big challenge, and what can we do collectively in this space and develop an ecosystem that's going to make the commitment to overcoming these barriers. And I believe that's part of the really important initiatives that a lot of large companies have. It's just getting that conversation going and how can we move it forward. And that is the biggest challenge right now. So is there anything else that you all would like to offer?
I guess I would just add on a key takeaway is now more so than ever, people are looking for a mission that they want to work for, not just a company they want to work for, and they want to feel that it emulates their personal values, not just a paycheck. And so we have to be ready to put budget towards that. We have to be ready to carve out formal initiatives from the leadership and beyond. And I don't think that was always the case before, and now it just has to be a priority. So when we're going through our annual operating plan program, we do carve out a significant portion of budget. And so I think that's trending, and I think we'll see it even more.
That's a really good point. Well, that's a really good key takeaway, which will lead us to Fran. Can you provide the audience a key takeaway? What would you like them to get out of today's conversation?
I think everything we've talked about today is about leadership and this realization that inclusion and bringing talent into such a critical area like security and cybersecurity will make you better.
Great. And MK?
I'll just double click on what Fran just said. Everything rises and falls on leadership. John Maxwell stated that in the book many, many years ago. Leadership is the key to solving this issue.
And I appreciate you all for stepping into this space, for reading the title, the description, and coming here and figuring out, getting some value from the questions as they were answered, and how are we all showing up tomorrow as better leaders ourselves. So appreciate your time and attention, and this sign says stop. I mean, can't get more than that.